Welcome to this episode of Between the Vines. No hops here, no vines, just vines. It's been a minute. We had some Christmas breaks, and we've been working on some professional things in terms of getting the team back up to staff, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. And we just wanted to touch base with everybody in this kind of rainy, wintry day, and try to get back on the schedule of doing these once a week. So with that, we do have a lot of, it's winter, so we've got a lot of upcoming things, and I'm going to let Jen handle that. So I'm here with Jennifer Phillips Russo, and she's going to get everybody up to date on what's going on in our region in terms of extension meetings and some other stuff that's been going on. So here's to you, Jen.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. It has been a minute since we've been together. So I just wanted to update everybody out there in our region about the work that I have been conducting. So I have been conducting our bud hardiness research going on. There is a new website that you can check out all that information at. I'm not even going to give it to you right now because it is a bit clunky. So it's something that we're developing, and it's a predictive modeling. So it's there. We're working on it. I'm going to do a newsletter on it for this month, so you'll be able to know a little bit more about it. And we're going to then, after the newsletter goes out, connect it to our website. But if you have any information or questions about what's going on, please feel free to reach out to me and I can share information with you. We have been collecting that all through the season, starting in November. In regards to meetings that are coming up, we have our second virtual conference meeting, which is the last part of our conference series. And one of our guest speakers is our very own Kevin Martin. He will be speaking along with oh my gracious. It has been a minute. You can tell we're out of practice for this. Dr. Justine Van de Heuvel from Cornell University is going to talk about some of her work with Michael Rise and putting implements into your soil to possibly increase that soil biology and the interaction between root and soil biology to improve your plant growth. So she's going to give a talk on that. That is February 9th. It's from 9 until I believe 11:30. So she's going to speak from 10 to 10:50ish, and then we'll have questions and answers and surveys to see, what you thought of the information presented. And Kevin will start at 9 o'clock in the morning. Kevin, do you want to touch base on a little bit what you're talking about? I didn't want to steal your thunder on that.
We'll see. I do want to cover some of the stuff that we've sort of uncovered just in terms of fertilizer prices today. So we'll have more information about the details of that talk.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So moving on, there is an Eastern group of enology and viticulture that we get together and try to do programming throughout the winter months. And it is with Penn State University, Cornell University, and Virginia Tech University. So we already had one of our webinars on H2A, and we can certainly provide information on the recordings of that when they're ready. And yesterday we had our second webinar where we had Fritz Westover. He talked to us. He's from Vineyard Advising, and he talked to us about the corrective measures to the top 10 dormant pruning mistakes in commercial vineyards. Unfortunately, we had some technical difficulty and we don't have a record of that meeting. It was not recorded, but he has generously offered to invite anybody who wants to see it in our region. It's January 19th. He's going to redo it. I can tell you we had 200 people in attendance and lots of great feedback. And as long as they learned one thing, walked away with one thing, we were happy, and people were just excited about the information that was shared there. So it was basically pruning mistakes that he has seen in his career and how to correct them and the reasoning behind correcting them. So sap flow, height of spurs, canes. So it was really interesting. You could go to our crop update because all of that information is out there with links and how you can watch that. Again, it's Fritz Westover talking about corrective measures to the top 10 dormant pruning mistakes in commercial vineyards. Our crop update this week also has all of his information, so you can see why we chose to have Fritz talk about it. We just didn't pick someone random off the street to give you some pruning tips. And then again, all the links to that information if you want to sign up for that January 19th meeting. The next big thing that I really want to talk to all of our listener and regional and statewide stakeholders in growing grapes, especially for New York State, is that we have Tim Weigel's position. It used to be the New York State Grape IPM specialist. He retired in the year 2019. So we have been without that position until right now when we are actually interviewing candidates for it. We had many successful applications come in, and the search committee whittled them down to our top 3 candidates. The way this goes is the candidates are then brought into our area to tour the area, talk with growers, and then give a research and extension seminar to our growers here at Clairol. And then again, they do it in Geneva the following day, which is recorded. Why is this important to you? Because we have the recordings of the first 2 seminars. So the first 2 successful candidates to come through this interview process in person, and they've already delivered their research seminars, basically telling them why they should be chosen for this position as the successful candidate. And we want you to take a moment, since this is your vested interest, this would be someone working very closely with all of you, to view those if you would. And then there's a link that you can give your feedback on which ones, who you thought was stronger, why, and we'll take all of that information and we will include it in our search committee when we are making that final decision on the successful candidate. I should mention there is one more candidate to interview, and that here at Clairol in Western New York will be on January 25th. All of the information is in the crop updates and emails that we have sent out previously. And then the recorded version will be from January 26th in Geneva. Kevin, do you have any questions? I know that I've been so deep immersed in this process that I feel like I may have glossed over something.
No, I don't think about that particular issue. No, I think, that's very exciting to be going through this interview process and seeing some good candidates. And I look forward to seeing where we end up with it. It does seem, extremely likely at this point that we will probably have a successful candidate. So that's the most, I think, exciting thing for me. I think, I've been working a lot with labor issues that farmers deal with, and also sort of observing other industries. And it's like, it's hard not to get a little bit concerned about, a failed search. We've seen failed searches in the Penn State system here and there and in the Cornell system. So it's exciting that we were able to, go through this process, and it's not done yet, and we don't know how it's going to end up for sure. But seeing, a lot of really intelligent people doing some good work, and they're interested in joining us. So that's exciting. So no questions about that. You did touch on a lot of different things. So if you are done talking about the IPM position, I could jump in for a second.
I just want to reiterate that I want people to watch those seminars, growers to watch those seminars, and then answer that survey so that your input is taken into consideration.
Absolutely. Yes.
In the end, we're all working for you. So.
Yep. So you touched on that H2A. I would encourage you, if you are considering H2A, to watch that. I don't think, if you're completely mechanized Concord grower and you've got, one hired guy that does all your hand follow up, maybe you don't need to watch that. But if you are concerned about labor, and I think probably maybe not half our growers, but half our acreage and a quarter of the growers are concerned, it gets more concerning as you get larger in size, I think. But those are some good tools, and there are growers that are having a lot of success with H2A. I've said this a number of times. It will never be cheaper than hiring local labor, but it may exist as opposed to local labor, which, those wage rates continue to go up very fast, but it gets to a point where the actual wage rate does not successfully recruit a qualified candidate in a timely way. Not to say if we gave everybody, $26 an hour for pruning grapes, eventually at some point we would recruit a larger talent pool at the expense of, sustainability. But we have seen 10, 15, 20% increases in wages. On average, I would say 15% a year over the last 2 or 3 years. So we're seeing the same thing in H2A is all I really wanted to say. And Penn State was lagging in H2A costs. So there's the adverse minimum wage rate. Penn State was about $1 behind New York for a couple of years. They caught up last year. So you look back 5 years ago, Pennsylvania was at $13.15. New York was at $13.25, so very similar. New York is now at $16.95 and Pennsylvania is at $16.55. So there is not a huge gap between the two states. And that wage rate looks at a bunch of different industries. It mostly focuses on ag, but it doesn't like look very closely at just grapes or just migrant type work. Like in grapes, we see migrant workers traditionally doing certain jobs and full-time help that has been here for many generations, traditionally doing other jobs. They don't distinguish between that when they study that labor rate. So we are seeing essentially all costs of labor rise. So as we see them all rise, we will see that adverse wage rate rise as well. The only other thing I wanted to touch base with you, and maybe just in terms of for a future podcast, I'm really looking forward to seeing that cold hardiness in particular. Just, when do we start deacclimating? Because I mentioned earlier, it's kind of gross outside and raining and it's kind of cold, but only because you're getting wet. It's not really all that cold, and it's January. So I'm just curious to sort of track that deacclimation process at this point. And I know it's early, but that's when it's most scary.
It is most scary, and I understand that. And I have been meeting regularly because of the IPM candidate selection with Dr. Jason Londo. He and I are the ones who are collaborating on this information.
Right.
And in our last meeting, we have met the 1,000-hour chilling hours. So potentially warm-ups could be an issue, but I'm hoping that it's not that much of a big deal right now. So looking at the models and going out, and I was on it today as well, we are far above where hitting that lower projected where we should be for Concord. And I also looked at all of our other varieties that we have going. So right now I'm not all that concerned. I do know that we have we had a very large swing from December 23rd to I think December 28th, maybe, where we had temperatures of -3 degrees Fahrenheit, and then they swung up to 60 degrees after that. I did have some growers contacting me, asking me about sap, not sap dripping or vines bleeding, but definitely noticing some. I didn't test it myself, so I'm not sure if it was just, maybe some rain that froze at the same time, but it does sound like maybe there's a little bit of solutes that are dripping out of some ends. So I brought that to Jason's and Terry Bates. We also were talking about it, worried maybe that we might have some vine injury, some trunk injury. The buds would be okay, but I would be a little bit concerned. Right now, most of that water has moved out of the plants. I would be even more concerned if it was closer to March and more water was moving up into the plants and we had these big swings.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it seems like most things are cold hardy, that at least in the Lake Erie region that we deal with in terms of volume of acreage.
Right.
Possibly there's a little bit of injury in some of the more tender varieties that are not widely grown here. But yeah, my bigger concern from an industry perspective overall would just be this sort of unseasonable weather after 1,000 hours of chilling. It's not that we're having issues at the moment, just that, all these warm days now will deacclimate and they are not going to sort of reacclimate at this point. So it's just something to watch, which is why I said it'd be a great thing for a future podcast as we continue to watch it and see when that deacclimation really starts to take hold, which, like you said, hasn't yet.
Right. And I normally see that around the second week of February in all of the past data, but this is unseasonably warm weather, so time will tell.
Right.
It is something that I'm interested to track.
Yep.
Before we get off this topic of meetings and whatnot,
Sure.
I do want to take one plug to get it on everybody's calendar for our in-person grower conference, which is going to be March 16th, 2023. Again, it will be held at the State University of New York at Fredonia. And that is a Thursday. The date is the exact same as last year. It's just a different day. So I don't want anybody to have any confusion with that. It is March 16th this year. And we have all of our speakers lined up. And as usual, I'm excited to bring this presentation. I just have to put out there, and I know we've mentioned it before, but it's also a plug for you to be a part of our advisory committee. We don't just pull these speakers out of the air and we think that you should learn about this. This actually comes from our advisory committee meetings, which consists of growers in the region and industry representatives. And we all talk about what we think the needs of the industry are and what they would want to learn more about. So we have nutritional talks happening about the nutrition study that's going on, the big SERI project led by Marcus Keller. We're having one of the research scientists going to talk about their work that they're doing as part of that SERI. And we have Dr. Terry Bates is going to piggyback off of that conversation to give a talk about how we can use certain tools to combine different layers of information to help with variable rate fertilizer applications. Then we're going to have another speaker talk about the trends over the last couple decades with weather and grapevine phenology specific to our region, and to kind of elaborate a little more on what has happened, what is happening now, and what could possibly be happening in the future. We have, in our disease, Greg Loeb is coming back again this year to give a talk. Presumably, our initial discussions would be on grape berry moth and certain possible resistance to chemicals, and maybe a lag time in female egg laying, and his research efforts and future thoughts of what to do to research that, to double check it and check the models. We have, I hear people in the background here at the office, I apologize. Then after that, we have Brian Head. So if you were a part of our first virtual series, he is going to be going even more in depth and giving out some handouts to talk about his research that he has done in regards to old chemicals versus new chemicals. And then we have Dr. Alejandro Calixto, who is the director of the New York State IPM program, going to give his talk about the spotted lanternfly now that it is in New York State, and first ones have been found in vineyards, not in our region, by the way, it's been the Hudson Valley. But we are bookended with an established population in Buffalo. We have one outside of Erie, Pennsylvania, so we can anticipate seeing that soon. Now what?
Right.
So he's going to be giving a talk on that. And we're also planning, I think there's one that I'm missing, and I apologize because I don't want to take too long on this, but it's going to be a great program. There's also going to be new faculty from both Cornell and PSU. Hopefully, I haven't had an exact person from PSU confirmed, but I'm hoping that that would happen, where we can sit down as an informal meeting as a group, sort of like an advisory committee, to talk about what growers see as the needs of the future of our industry and what they would like to. You have questions about resistance? Do you have questions about the spotted lanternfly? Do you have questions about technology and what you need? So it's just your chance to kind of meet the new faculty and seasoned researchers and give your opinion and hopefully guide some of that research and outreach efforts. So March 16th, put it on your calendar. We hope to see you there.
Awesome. Before we did go, I'm glad we got a chance to sort of plug that meeting, because that's one of those in-person ones where we really need to get the attendance established and registration going. So it's good if you are interested to start signing up for that meeting. I did want to talk a little bit about fertilizer prices. We've had an opportunity to sort of watch them, and they have been moving, but sort of the theme of 2023 for most of the year was a whole lot of volatility. And then, that pressure of that upward price pressure started to alleviate in April. But the volatility remained, and different fertilizers, different nutrients were moving in different directions until October. So the actual peak of each nutrient happened at a different time. But since October, the theme has sort of changed. So from October to December, everything started moving sort of universally lower, whether it was potash or nitrogen or phosphorus, everything was going lower. But it was not very volatile like the rest of the year for the most part. So we actually haven't had an update in a little bit, because it was pretty calm. So it was, it was sort of not very meaningful, but good to see that the upward pressure was gone and the volatility was also gone. 2023 things changed, even though it's still the 12th of January. It didn't take long for things to change. The volatility's back, and most fertilizers dropped somewhat significantly in the first couple of weeks. The ones that didn't pretty much did at the end of December instead. So we are now seeing some movement downward.
Oh,
Um,
well, that's good.
yeah, I think so. I hope so. I think, how much you're going to save in 2023 is going to depend on when you bought in 2022 and when you decide to buy in 2023. So potash prices, for example, are down about 7% from their 2022 lows. So if you got a great deal in 2022, um, you're going to save about 7% if you bought today. If these trends hold, you'll save more. If they reverse, you'll save less, or maybe it'll cost you more. They're down about 15% from their peak. Um, and it is, of course, possible, or maybe even likely. I think our grape growers reflect what happened globally in that less potassium was used last year because it was less affordable.
Right.
So we saw some pretty significant declines in the amount of potassium that was used globally. So you may not save anything if you use 15% or 30% more potassium and your price is 30% lower. You're going to end up spending the exact same amount. You'll just get more potassium for what you buy. The one thing I would say about potassium, we certainly learned this last year, or we probably always knew it, but a war or a pandemic or transportation, those are all bigger concerns for potassium. It's not that it doesn't affect other fertilizers, it just affects potassium more. It's a mined product, so it's more directly related with all of those issues than other fertilizers, which are manufactured. There may be some mining to it, but they're essentially manufactured products. Nitrogen products are down between 17 and 35%. If you sort of do the same thing I just did with potassium, you're comparing today's price versus the high and the low of last year. Late summer nitrogen prices were actually lower than most of 2022. I didn't really look at those because we don't buy nitrogen then, so I assume nobody bought in September or October. If you did, just because you were pre-buying, you did save a little compared to the prior year, but they have continued to fall. So assuming you purchased it in the first half of 2022, and you're purchasing it now in 2023, you're going to save somewhere between $3 and $9 per acre. So not that much different than the $5 and $12 per acre you'd save with potassium. So these are not huge numbers because we don't spend a whole lot of money per acre. And we are only seeing, differences of 20 to 30% or 7 to 15%. They could move more. The cost of phosphorus in grapes is all over the place, mostly because usage is all over the place. On average, if you are following recommendations, you might be using somewhere between 5 and 25 pounds per year. Larger amounts are typically used when they are used. It's just not every year. So I'm not going to try to figure out how much each grower might save because I think that there's just too many variables in the amount of use. But to sum it up, phosphorus prices remain historically quite high. They have trended lower. And I'm going to say exactly like nitrogen and potassium. And I'm going to say that because phosphorus in that world, there's more than one product and they move differently. So some of the major ones move like potassium in that 7 to 15% range, and some of them move like nitrogen in that 17 to 30% range. So it depends on which one you were buying. And the only other thing I would touch on is lime. It's not a nutrient, but it's related as a soil amendment. Those prices are on a more steady rise, and they have been for years. There was a little bit of a price spike last year compared to prior years, and then just trucking costs. The commodity itself is up about 35% over the last 5 years, but that's pretty linear, just a little bit each year. Overall, delivered lime is up about 15% over the last 2 years. That's probably just going to continue. I mean, it's just kind of bumping itself up as their costs rise. It's not like it went crazy and doubled in price and is going to come crashing down or anything like that. if you can truck it cheaper yourself, you're not going to realize most of those costs. But if it costs you a lot to truck it, you buy the same diesel that their trucking company buys. So it sort of is what it is. I would expect that lime is heavy. We put a lot down per acre compared to, say, urea. So it is just going to be expensive to get it to your farm. That's going to cost you somewhere between $5 and $15 per year, depending on what your baseline is and what you need to do with your lime. That's about it for fertilizer. It is a little bit unknown. I think there's still time to buy. Potassium is going to be the one that moves the most, if I had to wager a guess, or has the potential to move the most, because
In which direction?
Yes.
Do you know?
Yeah. Yes.
All of it. In which direction?
Right.
All
Well,
of it.
I mean, is the war in Ukraine going to get worse, or is it going to get resolved? Like, who's going to predict this? And I guess I would say it probably won't move very much, as much as some of the other prices, if it's driven by commodity prices, that's where you see nitrogen have the biggest impact. But if it's being driven by sort of global things unrelated, or not directly related to agriculture, that's when potassium moves. So it's harder to predict which direction potassium is going to move.
So potassium is a nutrient in itself that worries me, because everybody here knows that in the year, what year are we in right now? 2021, everybody had huge crops, right? Banger crops, the biggest ones that they've ever seen, that they've had before in their lives. And when that potassium is in the fruit, gets carried out of the vineyard. Then last year we had potassium prices that were so high, so people didn't put on as much potassium or as maintenance doses as they should. And that potassium is still getting pulled out of the vineyard. So now we'll have 2 years of potentially less potassium availability for your plants. So that's the one that worries me. I don't want people to skimp this year on their potassium program. So when you say that the prices are going down, that makes me happy.
Right. Yeah, they did go down, yes. And the other thing I would add in terms of predictability of potassium is, like I said, that use rate was down for the entire world for the last 2 years. And it was down directly related, which is pretty obvious if you think about it. You don't really need the data to figure this out, because it was less affordable. Like, people were not using less potassium because less corn was planted. That has happened in the past. That's not what happened here. What happened here is the price went crazy, so people bought less, and they tried to get by with less. Grape growers did it, and so did the rest of the world. So what that means is any sort of decline in potassium prices, there's probably going to be a lot of sensitivity to that in agriculture, and people are just going to use more as it becomes more affordable. Particularly since if they have used less, it's going to be more valuable and a better investment to use more. So yeah, when it's $100 a ton, people use extra that they don't need. But when they start to get behind, potassium becomes a much easier thing to justify. Like, the investment and the return on investment becomes much better when all of a sudden you're moving from obvious deficiency to adequacy, versus trying to build in the soil, which is harder to sell at $1,000 a ton. So I would expect the entire market, not just grapes, would be somewhat sensitive to price declines.
Well, that's good news, Kevin.
Maybe.
Normally I have to be the ray of sunshine, so thank you for that.
Well, that's all I have for this week. Don't want to step on your toes, but I think that's all you have too.
Yeah, just going crazy over on this end, catching up from the holiday. So please.
Yeah, I think the whole hiring process is, trying to fill these couple of positions that we have on the team is a lot of work, especially for Jen, a little bit for me. So we will try very hard to do this every week this month. And hopefully we see you next week. And if we hear from you, we will include any content you would like included. If you've got a question for us, please feel free to reach out, and we'll be happy to discuss it. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, have a great week, everyone.